Welcome to our third episode of the Listener Lead podcast. This is we're excited to have Shamsher Singh from the UK here. We've got Vinny, who was with me on the first podcast, as well as the second. We're just usually our podcast is called Listen or Leave, which essentially you can pay attention to us or you can choose to leave. Right now, obviously, our first episode was based on the Kisan issues, the protests happening in India, and I think that's the biggest news for us, anyway, relevant to us, and so we wanted to kind of continue to touch on that some more. And no better person than Shamsher Singh to kind of have that conversation with. Shamsher Singh is I'm gonna read this because I don't want to get it wrong. Is a co-founder of the National Sikh Youth Federation in the UK, the NSYF. So it's a Panthic Jathabandi that's educating and inspiring the youth with Sikh history, philosophy, polity, culture, and lifestyle. Shamsher, you guys have worked on various projects. I think I've even I've been on your website. I've read some of the reports you guys have done. So you guys are doing really important work, educating the diaspora, just bringing information that we didn't know existed to the forefront. So which is very important. And you've been on various panels with various artists, politicians. I know you were on one with the NDP leader of Canada, Jagmeet Singh, years ago. We're excited to have you here and have this conversation. We've met a few years ago in Edmonton, and I tell people till this day that what you said to me that day, you were like, I think we were having the discussion on how to how to get motivated to learn more of the Sikh history, and you were like, let the Qawmi Dard consume you. I won't forget that, and I was like, damn, that was like, it hits, right? And I think even Harman, me and him both, we talk about that till day. We're like, Shamsher Singh told us, let the Qawmi Dard consume. That's the only way you can kind of get consumed by everything and want to learn, right? I told Vinny about that as well, and Vinny, everyone seems to love that. So
that line motivated me, man, and
yeah,
that's crazy. Just hearing it from you, coming from a third party, but hopefully our listeners can get that flame lit.
Yeah. So
listening to this podcast.
So thanks for being with us, taking time out to be with us. So I guess let's kind of get started here, and let's start with what we're here to talk about, the Kisan protests and what your kind of views are of what's happening right now, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on and all those kind words. It means a lot. Trust me. This eruption that we're seeing right now has been there under the surface for a really long time, and it's come out like at different moments, at like Bargari, where there's Biadbi happening, during the Rajawana movement, and like now recently with the Kisan thing. There's been like these real kind of palpable moments where like the rage of Punjab that's like there under the surface erupts, and now this eruption has been unique and it's been different. It's got an edge to it. It's got this whole feeling of this like awakening that's taking place, and it's like commanding the attention of the entire diaspora. So like all of our attention is like on Punjab right now. And this has been building for a really long time, like this is like part of that same anger, that same rage, that same, desire for freedom, to fight against like any kind of imposition on Punjab that we've seen like from like, the 80s, onwards. So there's a lot in this eruption. It didn't just occur out of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's part of
So when you say that, like, it didn't occur out of nowhere, right? Like I guess that's kind of, again, why we have you here, is like we want to explain that, because we have, myself and Vin, we have people that say, oh, it's a random like issue to do with these bills that they've passed, or it's an all India, but it's about Sikh history, and it stems from Sikhi and Punjab and the relationship with the center, and obviously we want to kind of let people listening kind of educate them on how that is and why that is, and so yeah, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, like, so what's happening now, right? It's not just about economics or about farmers. Although like Delhi's attempts to like sell Punjab's land and that of other regions to multinational corporations, that has been like the immediate flashpoint of this resistance. There's a much deeper context to this. It's about the fascist government heading an Indian state that's been working to culturally assimilate the subcontinent and bring all power into Delhi and to centralize everything. And that's, you hear that like in Kanwar Garewal's song, right? Like, Pecha Pe Gaya Central, right? Like there's an awareness of what this conflict actually is. And you're hearing like through all the songs, and the folk songs are like really key because they capture a lot of people's feelings, right? They resonate, right? And that resonance is there in those songs, that like this is a takkar, a clash with Delhi right now that's happening, and the Delhi takkar to the Delhi Sarkar. Before you'd only hear it in certain circles where they talk about Tannashahi, like, imperialism, but now like that's become like much, much more widespread in terms of language. So this battle that we're seeing, this recent eruption, is part of this, push to push back against Delhi. When they're kind of, encroaching on Punjab continuously, and they're doing so with like the backing of, all of their kind of so-called Western powers. And this like latest economic policy is tied within this larger project to create like a subdued, homogenized population, right? That's that's helpless and subject to the whims of the Hindutva state. So this is where like Modi's talking about one nation, one language, one market. They want to bring everything under this, oneness. And what that oneness is, like, we don't get to define it. It's not Eko and God. It's not that oneness. This oneness is like, Hindustan in it, Hindu Rashtra in it. Like that's the oneness they're talking about. And you see that as well, like through all of their rhetoric, right? Like everything that the Indian state says is like, is drenched in that, from them imposing Hindi, from them like, giving preference to like Hindi majority states, like, with like the rise of Yogi Adityanath, right? Like this, like super fascist, like
he's called for violence openly towards Muslims. Like this is, I think it's the most populous state in India, right? That he's leading. The guy's a nut job, plain and simple.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he's made some like really, I think the politically correct people call them inflammatory speeches, right? But you're talking about like straight up riling right-wing Hindus for them to commit violence and atrocities against like lower castes, against Muslims, against Christians. So like this, this it runs deep, and what we're seeing now, like it's a manifestation of this deep seated conflict, and you see it with like their whole like demonetization policies, the taxes that they're trying to impose, undermining Kashmir sovereignty, the whole Ram Mandir issue. All of these are just reflections of the characteristics of Delhi. And so this isn't just like about economic policy of the bills in isolation, although that is the immediate flashpoint. And they're trying to, a lot of like the kind of Indian media and like the Indian kind of like political commentators are trying to declare this as like a secular morcha, right? Like it doesn't have religion to it. One voice. Go on, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, like when you say that, like what do you say to like myself and Vinny? Like I said, we have people come to us and they're like, stop making it a Sikh issue. Stop making it, a religious thing. Like, what do you say to someone like that who comes to you and says that?
Well, like a buddy of mine. Sorry to cut you off there, but yesterday I had this conversation where he's like, you have Haryana in this, you have UP, you have different states. It's not just Punjabi Sikhs.
which is true.
right?
It affects a broad
Exactly.
range of
They have
people.
some points there. Yeah.
But like obviously, I think me and Vinny have had this discussion too. But I think it stems from Punjab and Sikhi. So like, what would you say to someone who came and said that to you? Without obviously you can go into like you can I'm sure you can have conversations for hours. But like someone who doesn't have that knowledge of Sikh history, like how would you respond to them if they came to you and said that?
Um, like definitely, like you can't take Sikhi out of it at all. Like it's people like I think one guy just preaching from your guys' country in Toronto. He summed it up and he was like, people here, they're not coming here being inspired by Karl Marx, right? They're inspired by Guru Nanak, and that's like visible. I mean, like there's nothing I need to say on that. You just need to actually listen to the people in Punjab that are marching and hear their inspiration. Hear what inspires them, from like young kids to like elders, all talking about the same inspiration. And it's like Sikhi. They talk about the Shahidi of the Gurus. They talk about like Punjab being the land of like the Gurus and the martyrs. They're marching under the Nishan Sahib. So you
Which
can't.
which I know. I heard your last podcast with on Beers and Banes, which was good on them for having you and having that discussion. But I think Vinny, what's his name? Rajewal was the
Yeah.
Kisan Union leader.
Yeah. So the president of the Bharati Kisan Union the other day, he made a statement saying, remove the Nishan Sobs and have the Nahang Sikhs move from the forefront and move them to like the sides or some other camp out to the back or something, right? And I think that hurt a lot of Sikh sentiment. I was angered by that. What do you think about that statement that he made?
I mean, like offensive, and like I think the reaction speaks loudly. Like he had to apologize for making that statement. It's Sikhi that's driving people. It's Sikhi that's inspiring, like the langars. People are gathered under the Nishan Sahib, and this rhetoric of making it into a secular movement and trying to erase the Sikhi out of it, that comes from a certain place. It comes from the Indian media. It comes from, like the Indian state's talking points. One example that really kind of captured where this rhetoric is coming from for me was like Sukhbir Badal's dad, right? Prakash Badal, he writes an open letter to the Indian government returning some award or something, basically trying to become relevant again, right? Because those main political parties have been completely sidelined by this whole thing. So he writes this letter, and in that letter he says this one line. He's like, I can assure you that every single protester has like the secular character flowing through their blood or something like dramatic like that, right? Which is a completely like nonsense statement. It's a manufactured myth, right? Because if you're secular, then it's like Indians fighting, for India to like make India better and make democracy better in India. And if you take that kind of secular aspect out of it, then it's Sikhs fighting against Delhi, and then then that following that line, you go from okay, if it's Sikhs, then they're fighting for Delhi. Then the issue of autonomy comes into it, the larger context of Punjab comes into it, then the context of our struggle against India comes into it, and that's the conversation they don't want you to have. That's the conversation that's like been like violently kind of pushed back. So when people say take Sikhi out of it, like frankly, it's a very violent statement, right? Like because the last time people tried to do this was through genocide. Like there's no way you can take Sikhi out of the equation, and it's coming from a place of like weakness and like a victim mentality, and also like a weird kind of awareness of the Indian state. Like people that say don't make this into a religious issue, on some levels they're aware like the Indian state violently responds to people, right? So they're trying to push this kind of thing that if you kind of stay within the democratic system, then don't make it a religious issue, maybe the laws will get kind of repealed, right?
Well, I think, and like people have, like, I think just that whole idea, bringing religion into, because here, anyways, just what I've noticed, it's kind of ties in. Oh, if you bring Sikhi into, automatically you bring Khalistan into it, and they've tried to demonize that whole discussion. I mean, right, and they're even labeling all the protesters, even though it's not just Sikhs, it's not just Punjab, but they're saying it's Khalistanis. Even though you have people from all over India now a part of this protest, but they're trying to demonize that. And then, in personal experience, when I tweet something, like, I think twice about what I'm putting out there, right? Because you see what happened with Juggy, UK, born in the UK, and that fear. I mean, it sits there. It may not openly sit there in the forefront, but you think twice when you're doing something, right? And they've done a good job, I guess, of instilling that fear into people. So I think a lot of people, when we have that discussion, that's in their heads, and so they're just like, oh no, we don't even want to touch that. We don't even want to, like, let's just stay away from that, right? Would you agree, or?
Yeah, definitely. And like that's the kind of trap that we're caught in on either sides, right? Like you've got like liberals and like individuals that are kind of committed to like Indian politics and like this idea of the Indian nation state, right? That is something that can be reformed. They want it to be secular, and then on the other side, people are demonizing, like that this is tied to militancy, extremism, all the rest of it, and they're trying to vilify like all the protesters. And both of those kind of coming from the same place, though. Like there's definitely an awareness of the violent nature of the Indian state, and there's definitely a lot of fear and a lot of trauma. I've heard people openly say to me, "Don't talk about Khalistan because you know what the Indian government's like. They're going to start shooting people." So there's definitely like
Yeah.
let's say awareness about this in our community. Like we joke about this stuff, but we know plenty of uncles that say, "Well, I'm not going to say this because I'm at the India Janaya," right? And it's an open thing in our community. People openly, say that they're not going to talk about Khalistan, they're not going to talk about the Shaheed, they're not going to talk about certain subjects because they want to go to India. So they're aware, like the Indian state is like super vindictive. It's very arbitrary in how it can label someone, right? They've demonized like the Sikhi Sarup, essentially, like the image of like a turban bearded man in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Is associated with terrorism in like the Indian public persona, right? Like a certain type of turban as well, right? Like if you're wearing a gold star,
Yeah.
people look at you differently, like especially people that have that kind of like Indian mindset, let's just say.
Well, I mean, they tried that here with Jagmeet Singh when he had his leadership run because he has the Gold Star. They're like, oh, he's, they're trying to demonize the guy. And it was like, man, like, where does that even come from? The guy's running for Canadian politics. It has nothing to do with what you're like, you know what I mean? They just happen to bring that in. So, which is, it's ridiculous. But Vinny,
Well,
you had a, sorry, go ahead.
that comes from like the Indian state's demonization, right? Like this imagery tying a certain rhetoric to a certain body image of a Sikh that originates from a very specific place, and the fact that that logic is now visible in like Canadian politics, and you like the actors that are bringing those arguments in, right? Like individuals like that the guy who wrote a report on the MLI Institute, I forgot his name.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so he wrote this report, and one of the things he said was like one of the most like low-level comments you hear from like bot accounts on Twitter, where they're like, "Oh, if you want Khalistan, go make it in Pakistan." And this guy like wrote that as an argument, like he tried to pad it out, but that was the argument. Pakistan jaake Khalistan banana. It's like, bro, you don't know this argument. Clearly, someone's talking nonsense to you.
Yeah.
Straight up. So today, I guess there was Vinny, the news this morning from the protest. I think it was the Singhu border. You wanted to ask Shamsher about that. So just go ahead.
Are we okay? So basically, there was news this morning, early morning, that Sant Baba Ram Singh, he shot himself. I think it was, right, and there was a letter saying that that he's doing it in the hope that the government will take notice, right, and that it'll help. And there was some, I would not say backlash, but there was some comments saying that he shouldn't have committed suicide. But then some people are saying that he's a martyr, he's a shaheed because of this, right? So I think you have a lot of knowledge in this area. Would you say that what he did, he's now shaheed for the Sikh Qawm?
Like that's been like an intense conversation that's been happening like for a lot of us today, I think, right? Firstly, it's complex. Like anything we say, we have to firstly accept that we're not there. we don't understand fully like what their resistance is and the conditions of that resistance, right? Like everything we say, we're saying from the comfort of our homes. We're saying like detached from Punjab, and like we have to honor that, right? So anything we
Yeah.
do say, we can't be dismissive of individuals, and that's been my biggest problem with a lot of people that have made comments, like some of them very harsh comments about Babaram, saying about his death, um, and like very like dismissive comments, and I found that like really kind of like unfair, and like really kind of unjust, right? Um,
Yeah.
so the issue of like being a shaheed, firstly, like that it is a qawmi darja, right? It's attached to like the feelings of the Panth. Like it's not for me to say somebody is a shaheed or isn't a shaheed. I can have my own personal kind of views on this, right? Like for example,
Yeah.
we have like Sukha Janda, right? Like the Indian government has tried to label these individuals like terrorists, right? But the Qawm has labeled them shaheeds, right?
Shaheed.
Nobody can take that away from them, right? Nobody can undermine that in any way. So with Baba Ram Singh's death, some people have called it a Shahidi. Um, Personally, like I'm kind of like I don't know. I don't really know. I'm still processing it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, but to call it a
Fair
suicide as
enough.
well, I think that's kind of unfair as well, because suicide is like usually suicide has a very kind of strong connection to Christianity and a very kind of strong connection to like sin, right? So you're hearing a lot of people talking about like suicide is a sin, it's bad, this isn't what a Sikh does, this isn't how Sikhs resist, and all the rest of it. But he uses language. He's very clear in the letter that he writes, and that letter for me is very important. I think that letter should be our focus. And in that letter, he talks about the unbearable oppression that he's witnessing against like the farmers, and he talks about like zulum karna paap hai, the zulum sena bhi paap hai, right? Like if to commit an action of oppression, if that is a sin, right, then withstanding that oppression, that's also a sin. So and then he talks about how like many people are committing different actions to show their anger, their frustration towards the government, like their solidarity essentially as well. And he says, some people are returning awards, some people are doing this, and he says, "Main atam da karda hai." So he says, "Atam da." Atam is like atma, like your life, your soul. Da is a word for like burning, for cremation, right? So he's saying, I'm burning, I'm cremating my body, I'm leaving my body, and two, the reason why he says that is because he's like, "Main zulum de khilaf meri awaaz hai." He's like, this is my voice against oppression. So like if you look at his words, what he's saying, what he's thinking, like it's powerful, right? You can't
Yeah.
get away from this individual. And so some people are saying, oh, maybe it's a mental health issue, and like I think personally, I think that's another unfair thing as well.
Yeah.
Right? Look
Yeah.
at his words, look at what he's written. We have to go by that. And then there are like examples in our history as well where people have like sacrificed themselves, right? So if we look at this through a lens of sacrifice rather than a lens of suicide, I think the conversation slightly different. When we talk about suicide, especially from like a government perspective, it becomes a very kind of like rigid conversation almost, right? It becomes about like questions of right and wrong and like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I think that is like it's a harsh kind of framework to look at this situation. And then other people are talking about, oh, like him doing this doesn't bother the government, and like they don't care about it, and but at the same time, like clearly the people that are kind of undermining this as a non-Sikh kind of action of somebody who's like mentally weak, couldn't hack it, wasn't brave enough or something like that. That for me is like, then clearly you're just as indifferent as the Indian government to this individual then, right? Like
Yeah.
what has his like sacrifice in this moment, like what can we take from this? What can we learn from this? Like what is it asking us to do? So like
And obviously you can, like, he's left a note, so you kind of have to kind of
Take that into consideration.
take from that what you can. Like, you can't just brand everything as, oh, like you said, from a Western Judeo-Christian lens and say it's suicide, right? I mean, it's very different. Like you said, we're sitting over here detached from Punjab or what's happening on the ground, so it's very hard for us to. It's not fair for us to judge, plain and simple, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, because we've had some heated conversations this morning in WhatsApp groups about this, this news, and you had like. So we were like, oh, we've got to ask Shamsher, his thoughts on this because it just happened, right? And we just found out this morning. So, but
There's
I
like
guess,
another moment from our history, right? We have like Sant Fateh Singh, who is like this Akali leader in like the 70s or whatever, right? And then he goes on, he makes this promise for the Punjabi Suba movement and like the demands of the Punjabi Suba movement, like for Chandigarh to become part of Punjab, for Punjab's linguistic rights and all the rest
yeah,
of it. And the government's not listening, and so he decides to do an ardas and says that he's gonna keep a fast until the death, and then if he doesn't and then he's gonna basically burn himself to death, right? If the government doesn't into the demands. Indira Gandhi like convinces him that she'll listen. She obviously doesn't, then backtracks, and then Darshan Singh Feroman, he calls out Sant Fateh Singh and he said, look, you've done an ardas to do something. You said until the government doesn't change its, until this doesn't happen, you're gonna, have a fast until death, right? And like he then takes it upon himself and he says, you've done the ardas, now I'm gonna take it upon myself to fulfill that ardas. So then he takes a maran varta, right, like a fast until death, in order to like fulfill that. So it's a complicated area. It can't be black and white. There has to be like nuance to the conversation. There has to be empathy as well.
100%. And I think just getting back to the protest, like going back to the protest, how you said it's not black and white. There's like it's very simplistic to see something right and wrong. There's so many things happening around, and with the whole Punjab being, for me, this feels like. I feel as if though this is just another attack on Punjab, another attack on Sikhs, and now essentially they can't send their military in and take our lands. So economically, they're annexing our lands by implementing these new ordinances, impoverishing the people of Punjab, and eventually the Adanis and the Ambanis are going to control this land, who are aligned with Modi. Right? That's how I see it, anyways. So for me, it was like, okay, this is huge. This is so important, and I think like you see that with people like just the way people are protesting, the way they've been. You guys got like Lakha Sadana. I listen to him because he makes a lot of valid points, and Deep Sidhu is another guy that connects with the youth, or guys maybe like me who don't have that extensive knowledge of Sikh, so this is kind of like an entryway, but like it's just so much more. And then I guess it all stems from like partition, the Punjabi Suba movement, like you've said, the water issues. Me and Vin both just watched Final Assault, the documentary, and it kind of touched on everything, but like the Bani issues. You've taken our water. I think Punjab is the only state in India that doesn't have distribution rights over its river waters. I don't know if I'm wrong, just correct me, but that's my understanding. So I think 75% of our waters are diverted to like Rajasthan. I think they're even trying to send it to Gujarat now, Haryana, and we've got water issues, and that's our land. That's like we're in agricultural state. And we all hear about the Pani, Dunga ho gaya. They're putting the bores in 300-400 feet. Like they're saying we're going to be a desert, and now you're coming after that very land, right? You've taken the water. You've trying to take our language. You're trying to take our faith, and now we're going to take your land, right? I can't see it any other way. And people try to say, well, look at it this way. I'm like, I can't, because there's so much history there, and it's just been a constant barrage of like slow attacks, one thing or another, right? So I'm sure you would agree on this too, right? Like I mean, you have to go back into history and see all these things, and maybe you can touch on these issues in more detail of how that's kind of built up to the situation we have today, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people would agree with you. I mean, they're clearly on the streets of Delhi, right? Because they see it how I guess we're seeing it, right? And that's been one of the kind of threads of the narrative of the Indian state, is that these farmers are uneducated. The problem is that they don't understand the laws, and that's been part of the kind of outrage as well when that the protest and this kind of movement has been quite tenacious and quite organized, and they've had like pizza and like foot massages and like gyms set up, and
Yeah.
they've got tents set up and everything, and I think that's part of that kind of this outrage that the conservative Indians are feeling, that why is this protest so tenacious, so I'm hearing a bit of interference. I don't know if that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's your mic there.
It sounds like something's printing.
Oh,
It's clear. It's clear on my end here now.
okay. But yeah, so like that's been one of the kind of outrages, right? Like, why are these guys like so tenacious? Why do they speak English? Why aren't they these uneducated, folk that we've kind of heard about, right? Through Bollywood, that the stereotype that they're used to, they're used to this like aggressive, irrational Sardar, or like this happy-go-lucky Sardar character, right? And they're not seeing the caricatures; they're seeing how we see Punjab. They're
Yeah.
seeing this courage, this resilience. They're seeing like a power, an attitude of like defiance, right? So I think that is like a big kind of shock for the people on the kind of the other end of the mortar, let's say.
Because there's been like this issue, like, again, it doesn't just affect Punjab. Like, you had attempted protests. I think Vinny, is it UP? I think it was UP when they came and they drank their own urine, and they were eating rats, and they basically, Modi just said, get out of here. We don't care what you're doing, right? Like, and now it's a little different. Now you've got Sikhs coming to Delhi, and they're not going back, right? They're not like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
I think it was Tamil.
Oh, Tamil. Sorry, yeah, Tamil Nadu. Yeah. So,
like there's like the thing is there is like saying like there is this larger context there, and you see it. It's visible in the way people speak, right? So when
mhm,
people talk on these stages, when you have these like powerful kind of moments of oration, when like Punjab Sikh is kind of narrating, what's brought them to this point, you see all of those issues come up, right? Like, our bully, our farming, our development, our autonomy, and the demands keep kind of building, right? And you see that like more so before this kind of where we are now in Delhi, with like this kind of centralized stage that's managed by the farmer union. You see it more. You see it in the songs clearly, like
yeah,
that's
100%.
uncontestable, right? It's there, and you see it in Shambhu Morcha. So Shambhu Morcha was like kind of a parallel space that was created. That was like very decentralized. There was no like leadership. There was no like agenda. There was just like a space that was created for the Sangat to come together to talk about this unfolding struggle for the Kisan and for their rights. And this has been happening for like months, right, before this march to Delhi. And that's where this mobilization towards Delhi comes from. It's from Shambhu Morcha, because the farmers' unions, they didn't want to march to Delhi. They're the
They
ones
did.
that,
They didn't want to go to Delhi.
nah, they didn't want to go to Delhi because they don't want to conflict with Delhi.
Yeah,
They
because
are,
they're like, they're comrades, right? Am I right? For the most part, the leaders
they,
of
they,
these unions.
they're diverse. They're a diverse bunch. Some of them are comrades. Some of them are like very like kind of very kind of rigid in their like political ideology. They don't
Yeah,
want to be part of it. And yeah, definitely that's a part of it. But they're a diverse group. They also have their own kind of like differences and internal struggles with each
yeah,
other. Not like one kind of homogenous group. And the same way with like what kind of came from Shambhu, like that's where like Deep Sidhu, like Kasadana kind of emerged, like these two powerful voices amongst others as well. Other voices became quite prominent and powerful within Shambhu Morcha. And this
what
kind of
Well, I was gonna say, what are your thoughts on like just like Deep Sidhu and Lakha Sadhana? Like, your personal views on their involvement in the in the protests and what they're doing today. Like, what are your just? I'd like to hear that, because I think a lot of younger people, like, that's who they listen to or like try to connect with. So, what are your thoughts on them?
yeah, sure. Before I get into that, because I can
Yeah,
pick up on that question, there's like a lot of interference.
yeah. I was gonna say, I hear that.
It's not me. I tried to disable my mic and I can't.
Just,
Let me disable my mic.
okay.
No, it's still there. It's you, Joe.
It's Joe. Yeah.
It's always me. It's
Have you got
always
like a fan on or like AC unit
no.
or something?
I got nothing on.
You
I've got
you
the
might
most
want
high
to
tech podcast equipment too, and I'm always the one with the
maybe
problems.
maybe maybe unplug your mic and plug it back in.
I just did. Can you hear me now? It's good now. Should be good.
No, it's not. It's still there.
Okay,
Okay.
you guys keep continuing. I'll mute my mic. Just go on.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
on
we're
Deep Sidhu and Lakha Sadhana, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, on these two guys, like, I mean, they're like so important to what's happening right now. They're so important to the dynamic. One of the kind of issues that I've had with how we're kind of viewing things and engaging with the whole conversation in the diaspora has been like this prioritization given to everything that's in English, right? So there's a couple of individuals that are on the ground there that have been like tweeting in English. And their feeds are like, given like a lot of like credit and a lot of weight. Like these are like voices, authentic voices from the ground.
Yeah.
Their voices with an English account, right? They can speak English. Like that's why they've been given so much prominence by the diaspora. And it's like kind of annoying as well because like a lot of their critiques and a lot of their kind of background is like it doesn't have any depth to it. Like there's literally just giving you like a kind of breakdown of what's happening. They're very kind of like pro Indian Union and pro kind of India, and they're really really kind of anti Khalistan as well. And basically that kind of relationship with what's happening on the ground erases like all of the conversation happening in Punjabi. And that's where like the voices are like Deep Sidhu, like Kasadana, like there's so many other voices that are speaking in Punjabi that like really give you a sense of what's happening because you're not hearing someone else's kind of interpretation or filter, you're hearing from the people. So like in that kind of context, Deep Sidhu, like Kasadana, like they're really really key because like Deep Sidhu in particular, his role in this whole thing like has drastically changed the entire dynamics. Like him and Lakha Sadhana have become like almost like representative of like this parallel power base, right? They've become voices of the youth and the Sangat, right? And so Deep Sidhu makes one comment when the farmer unions have one of their kind of meetings, like this was before they went to Delhi. And they had a meeting, I think it was in Chandigarh or somewhere, and like they had a meeting with the government and they went and they ate the food that the government provided. They had like the lunch or whatever. So Deep Sidhu then makes an issue about it. He's like, you guys are farmers, you're meant to be like unions, and you go there and eat the government's food and you come back and then like, what is this? And then there was an interview with one of the leaders of the farmer union, and he complained about this. And these guys are also like, oh, Deep Sidhu cannot speak from the stage there and all the rest of it. So that leader from the farmer union, he complained about that and he said, look, who is Deep Sidhu to tell us, to not eat the government's food? Why are they making such a big deal out of it? This is a minor issue, it's a non-issue. And then the same guys are like, now aware that this isn't going to run anymore. So when they had their next meeting, and we know what happened then, right? Became this whole international media sensation about how the farmers bought their own food and they didn't eat the government's food. And it's like, if you were left up to your own devices, you would have sat around that table and munched that 5-star, dinner, right? And it's because these people called you out on it, that now you can no longer behave in the way that you are accustomed to behaving when you think that the negotiation should happen in a certain way, right? So these schools also like put it on them that these negotiations that are taking place need to happen in front of the Sangat in public. Like that's where they should be happening, because our position is that the laws need to be repealed. There's essentially not a lot to negotiate on. So what is it that you need to have like 3-day long meetings with the government? You need to have them in public. And the farmers union are kind of like tied into this whole kind of rigid system of, no, we got to sit around the table and you're doing a meeting. You got to have like, this meeting set up, and it's a very kind of top down, hierarchical, authoritative kind of way, right? Like the state wants you to get caught up in that stuff, right? The state doesn't want to see like, 10,000 people turn up with a demand. Like that was one of the first complaints that the government put towards the farmers' unions, right? There's too many of you. Like you need elect a panel of like 5, 10, 15 people that represent all of you hundreds of thousands. Because that was one of the first issues, right? That the government pulled up.
You guys can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't have my mic plugged in, actually, my actual mic. So, but
Wow.
I told you I'm not technically very good at this, but I'm learning. Anyways, when you say like the farmers unions, just going back historically, what has their role been? Like I know with the Anandpur Sahib resolution and all that. Which side have they been on? Just so we can get an understanding. Like, are these people that we can trust essentially, or are these people that need eyes on them 24/7 and they need to be watched when they're doing something, especially right now when they're in those meetings with the central government? Like what's historically where have they been, and like can we trust them, or like do we need to have our eyes on them, or is there like factions amongst those groups, you know?
Yeah, I mean, so like firstly, like, you know how we may view unions here, like, you know, as these kind of radical bodies that, you know, are really kind of committed to like socialism and like are about workers' rights and about challenging the government and all the rest of the stuff, right? Like the way kind of unionist politics are viewed here, especially in the UK. And I know it's kind of similar in North America as well, right? They're seen as like radical and they're seen as progressive. They're seen as like anti-establishment. And you know the unions that are pro-establishment, right? Like it becomes very obvious when you're in that world. So that dynamic isn't, you know, translatable to India, unfortunately. So the unions end up becoming facilitators a lot of the time, you know, to kind of put the government's objectives, and you know they end up kind of, you know, cooling down the movement, and they end up becoming like this co-opted entity. And that happens a lot here as well, to be honest. You know, it happens in a lot of places where there's kind of tensions between like, you know, capitalist imperialist state and like workers, right? So when the unions kind of fail in their role, it results in like the stagnation that we've seen over the last like 35 years when it comes to Punjab. You know, the farmers issue, agrarian issues, water right issue, the issue around the MSP, issue around like Karja Maafi, like debt forgiveness for like farmers. None of these issues have been like successfully dealt with by the unions in like the 35 year history.
So what have they done? Like, you know, what good are they essentially? Like, do they have a role to play still? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is their purpose then in all this? If they haven't been able to deliver, like we see the state of affairs in Punjab, especially the agriculture sector, like, you know, people say, oh, the Green Revolution, but you look into it, I mean, that was probably the worst thing that could happen to Punjab, right? And we're feeling the effects of it with cancer, stillbirths, suicides, you know, the Pani issues. And you mentioned this. Yeah, you mentioned this in the last one I was watching, but which I didn't even know, was like, you know, some of the crops like the chona is not indigenous to Punjab. Like we shouldn't, and that uses so much more water, which is drained. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, like, and I learned that, I was like, what the hell? I had no clue this, like that was the case. I've been always like, oh, the Green Revolutions, we're the, you know, the granary of India, like we're, yeah, but like, look at us now, right? Like, and so what have these unions done? Like, if they haven't done any, they clearly haven't done anything. That's from what I can tell and what I know right now, right?
I think that you wouldn't be alone in that sentiment. You know, their role has definitely not been as confrontational or as effective as it should have been. You know, especially when it comes to like these two kind of clear issues. One is like the MSP, so the minimum support price, which is like a subsidy price set by the government for crops, and that isn't paid like on a regular basis, like for all the time pretty much. If you're a farmer, you're not getting the MSP, you're getting less than the MSP, round about the MSP, but never the MSP, right? So the farmer unions haven't been successful in that. They haven't been successful in you know, eliminating corruption from the APMC Mandi system, whatever it is, right? Like the government backed kind of marketplace. They haven't been successful in securing like regulation around pesticide use. They haven't been successful in preventing the draining of Punjab's like water table. They haven't been successful in raising their voice against like the introduction of like high yield seeds and like the mechanized farming that's like kind of undermined Punjab's agriculture. They haven't been successful in like the main issue of like our pani, right, our water rights.
So they haven't been successful in anything. It seems like
and the debt, like
right.
one of their issues was like to get the farmers' debts forgiven, that they had taken loans from the government when their crops have failed or their crops had been like hit by a while back. People might have seen it on the news. There was a cotton crop. There's like a cotton belt farming. Punjab does a lot of cotton as well, and that was hit by a pesticide. It was hit by a pest, and a lot of that crop was essentially like destroyed. Yeah, and like they couldn't get like the debt marked for those farmers. So like they've been like, and it's harsh. Like, and I don't want to be like that critical of the farmers' unions, because I'm sure they're operating within a system that wants them to fail, at every opportunity. But at the same time, if it was up to the farmers' union, we wouldn't be in Delhi right now. They would have settled. They wouldn't have stuck on this demand, which is now the Sangat's demand. Like the farmers' unions are essentially, they're in a position of leadership, but they're not the leadership.
They're not the leadership.
You're not the leadership, and that's clear. Like I mean, like when Gurdas Maan gets refused to speak on stage, a very clear, like that's undeniable, right? Like it's not their stage.
That was great. I was very,
I was kind of torn. I kind of felt bad for him at the same time, but I get it.
We grew up listening to his music. It is my dad's favorite singer, and he doesn't even want to hear it right now. So when I bring it up that Gurdas Maan's cut, he's just like he turns the other way, right? It's hard for him to understand that, but that's
no luck for me, man. This guy's chilling with KPS Gill, so I'm like, sit your ass back down.
Yeah, it's like you're done, bud. You can't.
And that goes back to show how powerful, how big Lakka and Deep are getting, because Lakka called him out, I think, and that's where a lot of people are like, Gurdas Maan, you know what? No, screw you.
Yeah, and it shows as well, right? Like what Lakka and Deep, the role they're kind of playing, the position of leadership that they're in, they're not acting like we are leaders. For them, their role as leaders is to empower people. And that's what the best type of leadership does, right? Like, so it's not like Lakka is now the repository of knowledge and he is the authority. Like that's amongst all the Sangat, right? He's sharing that knowledge. Everything he's doing in the open. So the Lakka's position is the position of the people around him and the wider Sangat, right? So that's where the farmers' unions are kind of like caught in between like a rock and a hard places, like the Gore Hira taught me to say. But like you got the government on one end and you got like the mass of people on the other end, and the unions can't back down. Like there is no backing down. And if it was up to them, honestly, what we would see right now is the government saying, you know what, we're going to repeal the laws, we're going to form a specialist commission, we're going to bring on some leading economists and some people from the farmers unions, and we're going to do a 3-year process of like slowly kind of figuring out what these laws are doing. And 3 years time, people forgotten about the issue. Next thing you know, the laws are kind of they're enacting, and people
they're just gonna waste time till at that point. People they don't got the financial means to last that long, right? Like by that time, it's like the Jameen's gonna be gone.
Some interesting commentary I saw, right? I can't remember who it was, but it was like I think it was like an Indian kind of journalist, and he was talking about how in Sheena Bagh, when like the Muslims were protesting against the CAA laws, he was like, Delhi was dealing with like these urban, people, like workers essentially, right? And they they couldn't protest for like weeks on end because they would like literally they need wages to like survive. And he's like, now you're dealing with people that aren't urbanites, right? You're dealing with like Jimmy.
You
guys are come with 6 months food, right? They it's a different game. They don't work 9 to 5, right? Like you're a Jimidar, like it's a different lifestyle. You're not like tied to a desk where you got to turn up and clock in and get paid, right? you're harvesting, you're dealing in, you're working in seasons, right?
Yeah.
Not
Absolutely.
And I think I wanted to actually ask you about, like, or just bring that up, is like the importance of land ownership, right? Like, because otherwise, I think this is another comment somebody, and he wasn't saying it in a insulting way, but he was saying, like, if this happens, like, we're going to be the ones going to Bihar and working, like, the Biharis are coming here and doing these works because they're not able to they don't have land.
They don't have that MSP.
Yeah, where they don't have that ability now. And he goes, that's going to be the state of Punjab if these ordinances continue. Like, we're going to be going to Bihar then, right? Like,
this is the thing, right? So, couple of issues, right? Like, firstly, this has been happening to us for a long time. That's why my family, who's a land-owning family and has been for generations, my mom left Punjab to come and work in a factory here in the UK. And there's so many of our parents that we left Punjab to come and work in like lumber mills and drive taxis, drive trucks, right? And like work as cleaners and like do any job that you could get, right? Like when my dad came, he worked as a janitor, right? So they did any job that they could get. They left Punjab, they left like that lifestyle, they left their land because of this forced migration, because like it became very difficult to secure a future in Punjab. And there's some people that decided to leave, there's some people that decided to fight, and there's some people that decided to stay, right?
Yeah.
And like to kind of make do with the situation. Now, the people that have stayed, that have survived the genocides, have survived like civil war and insurgency, are now like facing that same choice again, right? Like, are we now, like, you take my village, for example, like half of the village, like, is in Canada, like the youth are in Canada. So one thing we're not talking about, right, is like this dynamic. Why are we seeing so many elders and so many like, elder people like Babbe and Bibian, right? And like really young kids. Where is that kind of Giovanni age gone, right? A lot of it here in Canada and in the UK, right? So we this process of like forced migration from Punjab to earn a better wage and make a better life for ourselves has been happening for a long time. So like when my parents came here, they came with the intention that one day they'll go back, but that one day never came, right?
Yeah, and I guess like how you said, like how they're not clocking in 9 to 5, they're not worried about getting fired. When you have that ability, that's when you can think, and you see why Sikhs were so progressive. Why was the Emperor Ranjit Singh so progressive? It's like when you're essentially control, or you're your own boss, or whatever you want to call it. Like, you have your own jameen, then you have time to think about other things. You have time to like kind of grow. Whereas, they're forced to work here. It's all about working, and you're clocking in, clocking out. You don't have time to think about anything else. And I think that also affects, when you see people, the youth here, who, me as well, when I grew up, I didn't know anything about Sikhi really. Parents both work 2 jobs, whatever it is, right? There's no time. And that time is so valuable. Like, and I kid you not, I thought Gandhi was great when I was young. I thought Indira Gandhi was like, I read a book on her. Like, I bought a book when I was a kid. And then like when I got access to information and knowledge and time I was like, holy, like I would demonize, I would agree with those people that said, oh, why did Sant Bhindranwale, he was a terrorist. Like, I would be like, yeah. But as soon as I learned and I had access to that information, I had time to go and learn. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, this is like, I don't want to swear, but that's fucked up, right? Like, plain and simple. Like, I've been misled, or I just didn't know. I didn't have access to that information. That comes back to your point of being the Jimidar, owning that land, being able to kind of control your own destiny, I guess, right?
And so that's the other thing I want to talk about, like this idea of land ownership, right?
Yeah.
So that changes with like the British colonizer. Before that, we didn't have a notion of land ownership. We had a notion of like stewardship, of like living in harmony with the land. But it was not like your Joe owns like 500 acres and like Vinny has like 20 acres and I've got like 5 acres. It wasn't like that. It was collective. Really? Yeah. The Kartarpur was collective, man. It was a commune, right? And like, because especially if you're looking at it from a Gursikh frame, right, and a Gursikh way of existence, like the desire wasn't to accumulate wealth. Like, that wasn't the goal, right? And that wasn't why we existed. Everything was communal. Deg fateh, right? Like, so much period of our history, we lived in jungles. We ate collectively. This is why langar is like, you can't take a langar out of us. You do anything to us, our first response is langar, because it's so deep deeply ingrained within our spirit. Like the police were beating these guys, and their response was, "Let's give them langar
Feed
because
them.
right, this is what we do." And like,
Well,
and that's
sorry,
the
just to interrupt before you go, but I was gonna say, like, in Delhi, people are now the poor. They're being fed. They're being looked after. They've got, shelter. The women are not worried about getting, harassed, or like, they're protected. Like the people are better off now because of these protesters there. They're looking after them, right?
massively, massively. Like one of the most moving things I've seen is like this footage of some children like that are like homeless, basically, who've been made homeless by like centuries of Brahmin domination. Like these low, so-called lower caste individuals that have been just marginalized, abused, neglected, treated like less than human. Like watching clips of these children saying that like they're eating so well for like some of them for the first time in their lives. And they're not only eating well, they're taking food home with them. Like nobody's like saying you can't have this or you can't eat here, you can't do that. And they're not used to like that, right? So like seeing that for me was like, oh, this is like,
wow,
this is the Kirpa of the Guru, right? Like,
That's amazing.
we let them know we're here in more ways than one, right? And like, this is what they're afraid of. They're afraid of this like way of life, man, because Sikhi challenges that notion. And what we're seeing right now in Delhi is we're seeing a decentralized, autonomous Sikh structure. Everything is there. Food is there. The education is there. There's our own security is there. There's gyms there. There's Babbar Khalsa foot massages. There's like Khalistani pizza. Like it's full on Khalsa Raj, right? On like Delhi, these guys ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's amazing to see, and like, yeah, you don't see that in any I've never seen a protest where they've essentially set up and they're looking after others instead of worried about themselves. Even with the Black Lives Matters protests in the States, you've never seen anything like this kind of protest. And you have like the Haryanvis, like there's Hindus, there's Sikhs, there's Muslims. They're like, we're all together. Like they're
coexisting.
Yeah, they're like, we're brothers, right? Like, which is awesome to see. And that's with, everyone's, the Nishan Sabs there. Everyone's got their own thing. They're all together, right? Which is, when someone says, oh, we don't want to make this a religious issue, we don't want to make it a Sikh Hindu issue. It's like those protesters includes Hindus, and they're sleeping together. They're protesting together. They're all together on this thing. So we should support that, and we should learn why that is.
And also, like the same people that say we don't want to make this into a Sikh if you're a religious thing, they're the same people that will be sharing the hell out of the memes when it's like, oh, you beat us and we feed you, and they're proud of that, right? They're like super proud of the Sikh response and the langar and everything, and just the way everyone's taken care of. And it's like, what is inspiring that? What's driving that? Is Sikhi. Is definitely not Hinduism, is not Christianity, it's not Islam, it's not the secular nature of the Indian state. The idea of Sarab Sanjivalta, this is like the blessing from the Guru to us. Right? We see divinity in all of creation. We don't have a notion of a kafir or a heretic or, a Shudra. We don't have that, idea within us. For us, we see literally a Kalpurak and Waheguru in everything. And this is how we're wired as Sikhs, right? Like we don't see these divisions of power. We sit on the floor, we all eat together, it's all communal, we're all chipping in, and it gets done. And this is one of there's a commentator from Punjab, like the editor of Sikh Siyasat, we did like this Panthic Punjab thing, and he was saying, he was like, the government did not know how to respond, because to them, they were like, well, what are you going to do, right? You're going to come to Delhi and you're going to squeeze on the streets. They couldn't conceptualize that Sikh would create, because the government's like, oh, what are you going to do? What are you going to eat? Where are you going to sleep? How are you going to pay? How are you going to look after 10,000 people? Sooner or later, these guys are going to turn up and they're going to turn around, they're going to go back home. They can't conceptualize like a Sikh will, create all of the things that they need. And then like there's one song and they were like, oh, Dilliye, like, you thought you were so high and mighty, and like Sikhane apne kashere sukne paate,
Ranjit. I think there's the Ranjit Baba one. Pizze had to be kholte, man. It's like
fully.
it's crazy. Well, I guess we'll talk maybe just a couple more. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know it's late there, but Vinny, have you anything that we've missed that you want to bring up? There's a couple things I just want to discuss before we wrap up. But Vinny, go ahead.
No, man, it's I'm actually learning a lot, man. It's an honor to have Shamsher Singh here, and yeah.
It's I guess like before we wrap up, and then Vinny, you can tell Shamsher how happy you are to have him here. Let me finish up.
No, go ahead. Go on with your questions.
I guess one of the things is like, how do you the response in the diaspora, and people doing these car rallies, people, even just post like people. I notice on my social media, people who have never posted anything Sikh related, every day there's something to do with the protest, and whether it's a protest, but you see sometimes there's like Sikh, like the Sikhs in the protest, right? So you see these things. Like, what are your views on the response from the diaspora and the generation that's born in whatever you want to call it, the West? Like, how do you feel about that so far? And then where also do you think, like, what more can we do and what should we continue to do, I guess, to kind of support this movement?
So like what's been happening is like really kind of affect us, right, in a really big way, I feel, because I think before we were like caught up in our lives, a lot of people were they're caught up in their own kind of individual pursuits, and like Punjab is like something that's far away, something that's maybe backward, something that there's a relationship with through like consuming, right, like culture, music, or or a touristy kind of relationship for a lot of people. But it's really kind of checked us, and it's reminded us of who we are. Like, we're Sikh and we're from Punjab, and like that means something to us, and I think that thing, what it means to us, we've seen like all over the world, wherever there's like a Sikh population, right, they've made it known. They've turned up at like the Indian embassies from Vancouver, Toronto to UK to like Germany to wherever, right, Australia, all over the world. They've turned up in force to the Indian embassies, like to kind of capture some of that energy and be part of it, and let the world know, essentially, right, like we stand for something, and that's been a powerful thing to be a part of, to witness, to like
it's encouraging.
Yeah, it's massively encouraging,
right?
And
because your guys is like, you guys, your organization, I mean, essentially you guys are educating, teaching people about Sikhi, the culture, and right, this is kind of, I guess, like it's put it into, it's like NOS, right? It's accelerated everything, so it must be encouraging for you to see that, just that whole process just accelerate, and then the work you guys can do with the NSYF as far as educating people, right? It just accelerates everything. So I mean, it must be really encouraging to see that. I'm inspired by it. Like, I got like cousins messaging me about like things who never even cared to ask about things, and it's like this, oh, I'm gonna look into this. So it's like, and then even for me, it's like Vinny as well. Like we were just wanting to learn more, dig into it deeper, and see where this, learn our history, learn who we are.
And you can even tell by our first podcast where we started talking about the Kisan protest, right? And the amount of response we had, it's like people are actually interested in people.
Yeah, we did with the second one we did. We just talked about which the original purpose of the podcast was to get together and talk nonsense, just the boys, right? That one is like not even close to the one where we touch on the Kisan protest. We touch on Sikhi. Like, people are messaging. People are like, they're happy to see that discussion happening. So it's good to see. It's really good to see. And hopefully, like, what do we just keep going? Like, how do we? Me sitting here, Vinny sitting here in Canada, like what do we do to keep, like, do we just keep doing what we're doing now? Like, what's the next step? Like, where do we go?
I think that's where the conversation needs to kind of shift at the moment. And I think at the moment, like our relationship with Punjab and like this morcha, it needs to move beyond being kind of transactional, right? Like, because we're in the West, we value ourselves and our lives and our time and everything more, right? We just think we're better because this is what white supremacy has taught us. We're closer to the West, so we must be better, right? So that needs to change like massively. we need to like center like Punjab, we need to center those voices. There's like incredibly powerful work that's happening there, that has been happening for a really long time. So that transactional relationship, and we've seen it like in the beginning a lot, right? And we still see it now as well. And that's been kind of one of the most frustrating aspects of this whole thing for me, is this whole thing of like, turning the Punjabi Kisan into victims and being like, oh, our poor fathers and like our, withered old people are walking around getting beaten by police and they need money. Let's give them blankets. Let's give them like socks. I don't know, like whatever, like, people in the West think that that's what they need. And they're like, yo, we've got 6 months of food. We've got like our rajanya, like, we're good. We don't really need like monetary resources, right?
Yeah.
So then people have started like, going above and beyond that and then donating to like charities, and the charities are like, look, we don't need like money, right? Because it becomes like an easy thing to do, right? Like I've given some money, I've contributed, I've done something now. More than that, we need to like change our relationship with the Punjab. We need to make it much, much deeper. And then the other thing is like, we've seen like a lot of kind of expressions of solidarity from politicians, like, from Sikh backgrounds, all over the world, like, the NDP there, like, Labour Party people here. And they've made these kind of like, statements of solidarity.
Yeah.
What we haven't seen.
Sorry, I'll let you finish up, and then I wanted to touch on that point with the government response from the West. So I'll let you finish, and then I guess I'll ask my question after.
For sure. So, but what we haven't seen is explicit condemnation of the Indian state. Like that's what we need. Like we need to create the pressure where, these politicians, these individuals that like claim to represent the community, feel that pressure from us as the grassroots that you guys need to say more. You can't just express solidarity and be like, oh, that's it, I'm done. Hashtag Sikh Lives Matter, hashtag Farmers Forever. Like you can't, that's not enough. You need to explicitly condemn India. You need to talk about the context, like that's really important. And also like the language, right? And that's been another one of my frustrations as well. Like every day it's like trying to explain to people there's no such thing as an Indian farmer. Like, what is an Indian farmer? Like, I don't speak Indian, I don't wear Indian, I don't eat Indian, I'm not from India, I don't have Indian culture, right? Mm-hmm. Like if somebody asked me to speak Indian, I'd find that offensive, right? Because I speak Punjabi, I eat Punjabi food, I'm a Sikh.
And I think a lot of people in India, whether they're, it's got 18 official languages, how many dialects, like you drive 2 hours east, you've got different culture, different food. You go 2 hours south, north, west, right? It's like essentially it's a subcontinent. It's just a conglomerate of countries put together under one umbrella, right? So even the people there will tell you like the Tamils want their own language. They're trying to protect their own identity and their cultures. And so, what is Indian? I guess nobody knows.
Right? Like that, the word comes from the imagination of European colonizers. They see like a bunch of brown people and they're like, well, you guys are Indians. And they go to like North America and they're like, oh, more brown people, you are also Indians. So like it's a completely made up term, right? Like from their imagination. In Punjabi, we don't say Indian. Indian isn't a Hindi word. It's not a Punjabi word. It's flipping a literal English European word, right? So like that would be big.
I was gonna say the only time that ever came in handy was when you're young and you're trying to get into places where you shouldn't with another Indian's ID because you all look alike, right? They just put you under one umbrella. But
that's where it comes from, right? Like that thought process, right? Like so for me, that's been one of the big frustrations is like watching organizations, particularly here in the UK. Like Sikh organizations that I have personally told multiple times, stop using this language of Indian farmers. Like, they're like, but it's all farmers in India and everybody's resisting. It's like, well, that's not the reality. The Punjab's farmers are on the vanguard. Every picture I've seen in every newspaper talking about Indian farmers has pictures of our elders, of Sardars.
Yeah, exactly.
Like every picture I've seen, like in the international media. So a notion of like Indian, farmers, Indians resisting against Indian laws, like it erases like so much. So like that's a big one, like holding our orgs accountable on their terminology, because that's a big thing we can do here in the West is like narrative, right?
Yeah,
like holding it down, and I've seen like. Rupi Kaur's article came out today where she talked, she centered like Punjab, like specifically. and that's a big thing because she has a big
Huge.
audience, right?
This
Yeah.
is the poet.
Yeah.
You really called the poet, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like her article was good. Like, you know, it touched a lot of bases. Like for me, like it made one omission that personally, like, you know, it's like a political thing. You know, she talked about Sikh genocide. So like she labeled the entire kind of period from like the 80s to the 90s as like Sikh genocide. And that kind of erased all of the resistance of the Khalistan Sangharsh. And, you know, I don't know what her own kind of view is and like what her kind of politics or where she kind of stands on that or how she sees that. But like, you know, to kind of like label that entire period a genocide it's a massive disservice, you know, like, and like it's also another kind of point of frustration because Sikhs weren't just being killed, they were fighting back. There was huge amount of resistance. And that resistance, you know, if we're talking about bravery and courage and standing up to tyranny, then like, you know, Indira Gandhi is like, you know, oda number kattya gaya Modi to.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that's the importance of having these discussions, right? Someone listens to it, they hear that, and they've maybe never heard it before. Now they're going to look into it. So just continuing the discussions, keep bringing these issues to the forefront are super important. And just lastly, I wanted to, you kind of touched on it, but the response from the Western governments, specifically, we're in Canada, you're in the UK, you have, I think it's your foreign minister, Dominic Raab, or whatever his name is. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but he's in Delhi right now, you know, negotiating with the Indian government. And I saw an interview, I think it was on NDTV with him. And, you know, the guy interviewing him is just like, oh, you know, you got these Khalistan. He doesn't even, he just kind of, oh, no, you know, in the UK, we have to let people peacefully protest. Like he's calling, like, he's not even saying anything. He's there negotiating. They're not Khalistan, or, you know, I'm not, but the protest itself, it's not Khalistani protest. So it's like, he doesn't respond at all. And then even here, just expanding on that, like in Canada, specifically to the Liberal Party's in power, we have a lot of Sikh MPs, as I'm sure you know. I don't know if they can't or they won't. They do their blanket statement, they tweet it, get some retweets, and you don't hear from them again. You know, and that's not all of them. There's some that are, you know, more openly, you know, supporting the protests, but it's just discouraging to see. It's like, we're in these positions of power. Are we just there as like pawns? Like, do we not have any real power? And in the UK, there's so many Sikhs. Do we not have any power? Are we just like, you know, you start questioning or thinking like, what is that? Are we just there as a showpiece?
I mean, like, we're not visible to them at all. Like, you know, like I say, like we're a hyper visible, invisible minority, right? Like even though we look so distinctive, you know, we're Indians. Like we don't have like that political clout. Because we don't stand for our qawm in the way we should, right? Like people know about Kashmir's struggle because Kashmiris stand for their sovereignty. People know about the Palestinian struggle because Palestinians stand for their sovereignty. You know, what do people know about Khalistan is like, you know, it's terrorism because the Indian media's narrative is so dominant, and the people that do stand for it, like, you know, are very, very small in number, even though they're very vocal. They're very small in number, and all of our kind of people that break into the mainstream, they distance themselves from this and they don't take those stands, right? And like our Sikh organizations in particular, they don't take those stands. And all of the Sikh organizations that we have right now in the diaspora were formed like from WSO in Canada to like, you know, the federations and the councils that we have here in the UK. They're all formed explicitly to advocate politically for Khalistan. Like that was in the founding thing on WSO's charter, like, you know, for here, you know, we got organizations that were formed, you know, that kind of went into that place of political representation. They were all formed with this explicit agenda of like representing the six political issues. Primary amongst those was Khalistan. So like that level of demonization has like seeped into our community. So of course we don't have that political clout, because when this stuff happens, you know, as our own community that's saying don't talk about Khalistan, it's like, this is the time to be talking about imperialism, colonialism, the conflict between Punjab and Delhi, the vindictive nature of this conflict, how this is part of a larger struggle, how, like, you know, Punjab's very existence has been at threat for decades, how we've lost our sovereignty, and so we've lost our autonomy through, like, you know, more than a century of colonial occupation and now the occupation of the Indian state. Like now's the time to talk about it. But our Sikh organization, what they want to do is just like they want those retweets, man. That like honestly, they love them.
Straight up.
They love
Yeah.
them. You
Yeah.
see them, man. They're like you watch Sikh organizations, right? Like soon as like a celebrity says something, then all of a sudden these Sikh organizations will start begging their retweets and they'll start begging visibility from those celebrities by like tagging them in and like directing content towards them and otherwise they don't even know who these individuals are. Like there's no uncle sitting in flipping one of these Sikh bodies here knows who like these rappers are talking about these Sikh issues and stuff, right?
Yeah.
They just want to jump on it because they want like they just want to be like in that space and to speak, but they're not saying anything, and that's been a problem for a really, really long time. So until we have like a political lobby that has teeth to it, that like demands stuff from politicians and makes it difficult for them, actually formulates a political agenda. Until we kind of get that, we're not going to get that type of engagement from these politicians because India has more to offer than we do. Like Britain is straight up, man. Britain is ruthless. Like this land of colonizers is one of the most ruthless places on the face of the earth, man. These guys will go to India in the midst of a pandemic while they're beating the shit out of our elders on the streets and go there, with their begging basket looking for trade deals, man.
They clearly don't even care about the
crazy.
optics. Like even optically, at least go later on.
They do not give a shit. Honestly, they could not give a shit. They know that the Sikh lobby here is so like fractured that all it takes for them to win the Sikh community over is do an event, invite a couple of prominent people in the community, eat the samosa, take the pictures with them. And that's it. And that's all it takes. And our community, well, not our community, the leaders, the so-called leaders of our community will literally sell out everything for that. And then they'll be like, Sardi Gala Chaldi, we're in a process of talking and discussing. And what you see is zero material progress. Like, let's just take the last 30 years as an example, 35 years. Now, I have to go much further back than that. The last 35 years, the biggest event in recent Sikh memory is the attack on Darbar Sahib. Britain sided with India to sell them Westland attack helicopters, and they sent the SAS to train Indian troops to take part in the attack on Darbar Sahib. They were giving them different guidance. They're like, why don't you land a helicopter and kidnap Sant Janel Singh, and all sorts of advice they were giving them in order to secure a helicopter deal. And like that's the biggest genocide we have, right? Like in our recent memory, and Britain straight up was a part of that. And they can beyond that as well, larger like military training programs, weapons to India, trying to secure trade deals, and the same thing's happening now. Like there's very, very little change, and it's not a question of one party like the Labour Party.
It's policy, it's institution. I saw what's his name? I don't know if I'm saying his name. Desi, the MP. He asked Boris Johnson. That guy just looked like, first of all, he didn't shower in the morning. And then he's like, oh, it's a matter between India and Pakistan. It's like, bro, what are you even talking about? Like, you're that like aloof that you don't even know. Like your citizens just protested, like a massive protest in central London, and you don't even know what's happening. It's like you just clearly don't care at that point, right? It's not a matter of
beyond that as well, man. Beyond that as well, he says it's an internal matter for India. That's the talking point of the Indian government. Every single right-wing journalist in India will say, "Sir, it is the matter of our internal matter." Like they're literally their main talking point is like this. Internal, don't interfere in the sovereignty of India. And like, see, India and Britain have got this really weird relationship, and like India really looks up to Britain, is fascinated by Britain because it wants everything, it wants to be Britain, and Britain looks to India with this really weird Orientalist, fetishizing Indian summers kind of weird lens, man. Flipping gore, man. They're flipping weird, bro. But like, so they're a complete, like, a really kind of incestuous, distorted, like, hideous kind of relationship They don't want to kind of undermine each other, and like, so Britain will like turn a blind eye for decades. Like India has been torturing its citizens, right? Like we know in our
Well,
case.
Juggy is the British citizen, and he's like that shock. That was like even
Okay,
for me. I was like,
like
damn.
let's like all of this stuff, right? Jaggi and the farm bills and Darbar Sahib attack, man. All of this is pales in comparison to the decade of genocidal counterinsurgency. So after the 80s, right, and this was kind of the thing that Rupi Kaur kind of glossed over in her article or omitted entirely, where she talks like, post 80s like genocide, right? So post 80s, the Sikhs decide that now definitely we ain't living in India. 86 said about the Khalsa, we're fighting armed resistance, Khalistan, pick up the weapons, let's like, shoot these Indian soldiers down in the streets, right? Like it's on now. So for a decade they fight. India's response to that, like India responds to insurgency, a political conflict with mass human rights violations.
Yeah.
Mass raped people. They like flipping peeled people's skins off, man. Like I was reading an account of like 7-year-old Bagel Kaur, like they stripped this child naked. They like put sugar and water on her, and they put her on a pile of ants. Like next, I mean, unimaginable, like soul chilling levels of torture. I mean, there's like so many stories I can tell you guys.
Yeah.
Well,
we gotta definitely we gotta like
I'll just wrap that up here. Like, so like there's
yeah.
so much torture that happens in that period, right?
Yeah.
And Britain as a country, like what did it say? Like, forget doing anything. Like, had it once condemned, like let's just talk facts. Let's talk like, that's what these guys pretend they care about. Let's talk about the 5,234 cases that INSAF has documented of extrajudicial murders. Let's talk. Have you condemned that? Like it's simple. Say we condemn India for killing 5,000, Sikhs in extrajudicial,
Killings,
extrajudicial killings, and no condemnation, no nothing.
The hypocrisy is just in these countries is just it's crazy.
I've heard British politicians talk about that. The way they kind of understand it is, one politician said to me that any large democracy like India is bound to have challenges.
First of all,
Brutal.
It's funny that they call it a democracy. That's which it ain't. But yeah, I mean, it's sad to see that. But I mean, hopefully, again, we have these conversations. People awaken, they get that knowledge, they learn, and hopefully we can make positive change. And we could have conversations. I would definitely want to have you back in the future because we can talk about specific issues like 84. You can talk about partition. You can, and those conversations alone can go on for hours and hours. So, so we'll definitely love to have you back sometime soon. Maybe just to end off, let us know about your organization that you've co-founded. I know I just kind of read it off a script. I didn't do any justice. I don't personally know too much about it. I went on your website, but just kind of let people know what it is that you guys do. And if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? And when we do end this, just don't close your screen till I tell you to, otherwise it won't save. Sorry.
So I'm the co-founder for NSYF, the National Sikh Youth Federation. We founded this organization because in Sikh spaces we heard a lot of like bump rhetoric, right? Like that gave it large about our shaheeds and like our azadi and like Khalistan, and we saw all the images of our shaheeds. But as soon as we stepped outside the Gurdwara, outside our Sikh spaces, these same individuals became like terrorists, and like, people were scared to talk about it. So like growing up with that, in that kind of fractured state, we wanted to like, be a voice, and we wanted to talk to, especially the young Sikh diaspora. That was like our key audience. This is our key audience, because like too many of our organizations, they only care to speak to whiteness and speak to the state, right? They don't really care to speak to youngsters. So that was like kind of our main founding vision and our purpose. And we've gone on from there. Like now I'm currently working with the newly founded Khalistan Center as the program director there. So yeah, it's been like, the focus of our organization has been the focus of like my work, my life is about like our struggle, is about our shaheeds, about Khalistan, about like, raising that voice, I suppose, and raising it as powerfully as we can. Essentially, like, this isn't something that should be mocked or demonized or trifled with. We're talking about the liberation struggle of the Khalsa Panth in it. So, so it's taken us on a very, very interesting journey. And if anyone wants to get in touch, you can check out our website, nsyf.org.uk. Drop us an email at info@nsyf.org.uk. We're kind of slow to respond sometimes, but we do get back to people.
Sounds awesome. Good. Vin, you can do your goodbye to Shamsher now that you were doing 10 minutes earlier.
No, it was absolutely great to have you on, man, and learned a lot. And I hope our listeners will listen to the full thing, and hopefully we'll get you back on to teach us some more things.
Perfect. Thanks for everyone to listening in on the Listen or Leave podcast. This will be on Spotify in a day or two. And then we also put the video version out on YouTube. So have a listen, educate yourself, learn, support the Kisan protest, learn about Punjab, learn about Sikhi. And let's just keep moving, having these discussions, and then hopefully in the near future we'll have Shamsher Singh back on to just continue discussing Sikh issues, and just continue educating people and helping the community grow. So thanks again, Shamsher, for coming on, making time out for our podcast, and we will good day to everyone. I'm gonna stop recording now, but remember, don't leave just yet.